It is always a joy uh, to share at this time. And so, just kind of spinning off what you said, we got the song and then your comments in the song. Uh, we're going to be talking about what it means to make the offering of finishing well. How about that? I'm trying hard here to make the two fit, but really, I do want you to answer. We're going to be talking about that. How do we finish well? And that is an offering of itself as we choose to finish well. The real title of this was just called Kick It In. I don't know what comes to your mind when I say kick it in, but I think many of you are aware of the fact that I am an athlete. I've been an athlete my entire life. I was swimming by the age of 3, jumping off the high dive, running, biking by the time I was 4, and I'm still running, biking, and swimming today, all these years later. Some of you also may be aware that I continue as an athlete. I am a triathlete, and every year I like to compete in 2 or 3 different triathlons. Over the years, I got so involved with the triathlon that I actually pursued and eventually did an Ironman. So if you're not familiar exactly what that is, an Ironman is an endurance. It's actually called an ultra endurance athletic competition, where you, as a triathlete, you swim, and then because you're not done and you're not tired yet, then you bike, and because you're not tired yet, then you run a marathon. And so I wanted to share that with you because when we think of the words kick it in, if you have an athletic background, and I've been doing sports, like I said, from the time I was 3. I was already doing the miniature league football, the swim team, the baseball team. I mean, my mom signed me up as soon as I was begging. So I actually was begging so bad, they let me start a year early because my birthday was in August the 17th and the cutoff was August the 1st. But they said, his birthday's almost, so I got to start doing a lot of the athletic competition early. But I used to be on the track team in junior high and in high school. And if any of you have a track team or you know a little bit about that, the words kick it in is something that the coach will tell you. He'll stand at the near the finish line, and then he'll scream your name and say, "Come on, Leatherwood, kick it in!" And that's code word for don't leave anything in the tank. If you've got any strength left, now's the time. Run as fast as you can. Kick it in because you're at the finish line. So I see Janice smiling a little bit already. She's heard this message before because every time I go on a vision trip, and so if you've been on me with a vision trip, some of our DPRs have been, and I find a way at every one of our vision trips to preach this exact message that I'm preaching to you. I just haven't shared it here in 17 years. And I thought to myself, you know what? Last time I shared, I said, I need to share, kick it in. And so today you're getting that. And I just wanted to share a little bit more here that the kingdom of heaven is not like an ultra endurance race. Jesus didn't tell any parables to athletes. Think about it. He told all kinds of wonderful parables, but none to athletes. And I just couldn't stand it. What I began to do is I began to wish that there was a parable that Christ told to the athletes so bad that I rewrote one of his. And so some of you have got this book already. I know Joyce bought everybody a book. This was a copy of the book that I wrote called The Parable of the Ironman. And so I wanted to read for you a parable of Christ that I rewrote for athletes. So as you listen to this, I want you to think of 2 things. I want a little bit of grace here, okay? So I embellish the story. I amplify the story, but I just other than taking artistic license there, I want you to try and imagine in your mind, which parable of Christ am I retelling? It'll be easy and it'll be hard because I've told people this parable before, and some people are saying, you know, I think you got 2 or 3 parables in there. I did. But if you want, just kind of listen to the parable of the big race and try and figure out which of the parables of Christ it was, and we'll talk more about kick it in. So this is the 1-page parable, and then the book goes on and tells a novel of the exact same parable. Here we go. The kingdom of heaven is like a coach that went out to recruit athletes to join his team to run a race. Some who heard the invitation didn't see any value in the opportunity and immediately turned away. Some immediately said yes, but never showed up for practice. Some said yes, but after the first 3 days of practice, they quit the team as they discovered that it was going to take a lot more energy than they first thought. Some thought it was a good idea, but didn't like the coach nor his prescribed method of training, so they joined another team. Some joined the team and prepared for the big race by doing as little as possible, making small compromises of effort and shortening the training distances. And so on race day, they discovered that they were unable to finish the race. Some prepared well, but had a poor race day strategy. Those who failed to regularly hydrate throughout the race also failed to finish the race. Some joined the team and began to enjoy the accolades associated with the team, lost sight of winning, and though they finished the race, they were among those who were last to cross the finish line. Some joined the team, but their hearts grew hard toward the coach, and they stopped listening to his voice. And while they stayed on the team, they began to listen to other trendy philosophies. They too were met with limited success. Some joined the team and felt the only way to win was to add an illegal advantage. So they secretly began to seek performance enhancement through doping. Once they were discovered, their awards were stripped and they were kicked off the team. Some joined the team and followed the coach's prescribed training and won gold, silver, and bronze medals. The parable of the big race. You can read the novel of the parable of the Ironman. I know you got a copy of it. Some of you just haven't got around to reading it yet. Best book ever. Anyway, without putting in a shameless plug there, let's get on with this whole idea of kick it in, and not necessarily the parable of the big race. You know, while Jesus didn't tell any parables to athletes, Paul did. And we know that he gives a couple of illustrations about athletic competition. And there is great debate on who wrote the book of Hebrews. I just want to just acknowledge that we don't know. Some suggest that Paul wrote it. Maybe he did. Instead of saying the author of Hebrews, I'm just going to say Paul. But in Hebrews chapters 11 and 12, most of you have a little sign that kicks up in your mind right away. It's almost like, you know, knowing the Beatitudes. Well, that's Matthew 5, 6, and 7. The chapter of love, that's 1 Corinthians 13. One of the chapters that's well memorized, at least the thought of it is, it's called Hebrews chapter 11, the hall of faith. Have you heard that? You've been in the church too long. A preacher has taught you about the Christian hall of faith. And so I just wanted to come back to you and suggest that the hall of faith is actually a ultra endurance race. I'm not kidding. I'm not the first person to have preached this message, but the scriptures kind of lend that way to an ultra endurance relay race. And so when you begin to see it in the terms of a relay race, you can get a little something there, and it's not doing damage to the text at all. As a matter of fact, as soon as you get into Hebrews chapter 12, he says this, the very first couple of verses, since we're surrounded by a stadium of people, is one translation. So since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us run this race. And so I just want to suggest to you that if there weren't chapter divisions, it's chapter 11 and 12 is one single thought, and that he might be alluding to a relay race here. And so I just wanted to kind of talk to you about this relay race, because if you read in Hebrews 11, he starts off with Abel, and he goes to Enoch, and he goes to Noah. And if you can just follow historically, you can find out who's next. Then he goes to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and from Jacob we go to Joseph, and from Joseph to Moses. Finally, he gets to the book of Judges, and he throws up his hands and he says, enough. And that's where I want to pick up. So if you have your Bibles, please join me in Hebrews chapter 11. Verse 32. And so we're at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32, the hall of faith, because he goes on and he lists all of these people in those first 31 verses. In verse 32, he gets to the book of Judges and he kind of changes thing. This is an honest preacher here. He knows he's preaching, and he just owns up to it right here. And he says in verse 32, how much more do I need to say? He says, listen, I've made my point. It would take me too long. I'd just be a long-winded preacher to recount the stories of the faith of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel and all the prophets. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, and received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions. They quenched the flames of fire and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put whole armies to flight. Women received loved ones back again from the dead. We just finished verse 35 here. Let me just pause to make a little point, because as an athlete, sometimes we use the imagery of, running uphill, running downhill, running against the wind. A lot of the imageries are there. And I just wanted you to note that he's making a case here that in this relay race, there were times in the relay race where some of our guys, those big names, they were winning the race. They had it good. They were running downhill with the wind at their back. Everything that they touched seemed to be blessed. Victory, victory, victory. But now he's going to talk about some other people on our team. These were people on our team that had to carry the baton uphill. They had to carry the baton into the wind, a fierce wind. The heat was hot for these folks. And so now let us begin at verse 35, is in the middle of verse 35. He talks about some of these teammates of ours. And he starts off with the word but. Okay, he says, everybody had it good so far. Look at the victories. Look at the faith. Look at the faith. Look what their faith did. These people rode on the wings of eagles with their faith. But there's another group of people that also had faith. Let's read about them. But others, and I'm going to add the word here, don't call me a heretic, but others through faith. But others who had faith were tortured, refusing to turn from God in order to be set free. They placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. Some were jeered at, and their backs were cut open with whips. Others were chained in prisons. Some died by stoning. Some were sawed in half, and others were killed with the sword. Some went about wearing skins of sheep and goats, destitute and oppressed and mistreated. They were too good for this world, wandering over deserts and mountains, hiding in caves and holes in the ground. Verse 39, all these people earned a good reputation because of their faith, yet none of them received all that God had promised. For God had something better in store for them, that they could not be made perfect without us. In one version, in the New Living Translation, back in the 1996 version, it says, God had something better in store, for no one can receive the prize until we finish the race. Listen to that again. God had something else in store so that they could not be perfected without us, for no one can receive the prize until we finish the race. That is not in the current New Living Translation. I want you to know, but it was, they changed the versions of New Living Translation a couple of times. You may not be aware of that. But I still have a copy of that Bible with that actual translation in it. It's beautiful. No one receives the prize until we finish the race. Then let's just go on over to chapter 12. And because I wanted to make sure that you really saw the imagery here of the athletes. 12 verse 1, same thought. Therefore, all these people who've run before us, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses, I want to say a stadium there. We're surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith. Now he gets into an athletic term. Let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. So the imagery here is, think of the athletes at the Olympics. They all show up in their really cool, they got their United States or whatever country they're from. They got these uniforms. They're called warm-ups. And they look good and they feel good and they keep you warm. But guess what? Nobody races in warm-ups. He says, let us strip off every weight. Let us get rid of everything. Get rid of the warm-ups. You're going to get down to just your bare necessities here. It's going to be light. And let us run. Again, I'm telling you, he's talking about a relay race here. And let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding the shame. Now he is seated in the place of honor beside God's throne. So, just wanted to share that with you here and kind of just let me talk a little bit more personally here, because I like to look at this in terms of asking ourselves, if we've got this relay of this ultra endurance relay race. Hey, I even got my visual aids today. Woo! All right. Leatherwood's not going to show up without a visual aid. You know what this is, don't you? This is a baton. A baton is the way it's actually pronounced, but you get this idea. This baton is being handed off from generation to generation to generation to generation, all the way from the beginning, Abel, from Adam to Abel to even this moment in history. And so as we begin to think about this, I want you to ask yourself this question. When is the race over? When is this relay race over? And I just wanted to point you to Matthew 24:14. If you can, join with me there. And we're going to read Matthew 24:14. And so I am actually going to just kind of make note. Some of you know the name George Eldon Ladd. He's one of the greatest theologians of just a generation in front of me. But George Eldon Ladd was he's a great writer. He's a great theologian. He's an apologist. And the story is told of him. He taught chapel, and on one particular chapel service, I mean, think about what would have happened here if I had taken his approach. But he did this. The whole chapel is gathered together. All the students are there. They've had worship, and now somebody's going to preach it to them good for 30, 45 minutes. Well, he gets up and he reads Matthew 24:14, and I give you the King James because we want to be in the authorized version. Okay. So Matthew 24:14 says this. And this was George Eldon's sermon. He came out there and he says, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." And then he said, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached to all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then the end shall come." And then he said, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached unto all nations, and then the end shall come." And he went and sat down. And now, 30 years later, I'm telling you, this great chapel service, because everybody had to scratch their head and say, "Is there anything more? Is that it?" He just wanted them to know one thing. He wanted them to know the finish line according to the Lord Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ told us when the finish line is. He says, "Listen, this is Jesus talking, not George Eldon lad. He says, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached to all nations, as a witness to all nations, and then the end shall come." So I just want to suggest to you that the end of the race, this baton race, it's when the nations are reached. And that's why I've personally committed my life to global discipleship, global evangelization. That's why I work at ICM. That's why I'm not looking to go somewhere else. As far as I know, this place has got the best strategy in place for reaching the world for Jesus Christ and reaching all nations for Jesus Christ. This is an exciting place to live. We are about, I love the way Joyce Rosser used to say it. He used to say, you know, this is what's on the Father's heart. We are doing what is on the Father's heart. And he gave us the commission, the Great Commission. He said, listen, this is the race. Go and make disciples of all nations. Go and make disciples of all nations. Baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Teach them to obey everything that I've commanded you. Well, I wanted to kind of tie it up. I realize here I'm going to tell you one more story, and then I'm going to ask a question and kind of drive home the answer to that question, and I will be done. I don't think I'm over time yet. So, but let me just tell you about my 8th grade junior high team. I was on the track team in 8th grade. The story I'm going to tell you can only happen in the 8th grade. I realize it can happen elsewhere, but nowhere else but in junior high do you get mismatches. Some guys who've gone through puberty and other guys are still little bitty squealy guys. And same can be said for the girls. But you know, it's puberty. You don't get to choose when your body's going to turn the switch. And so you get mismatches in 8th grade. And that was the case that we had. But I was on the track team, but I wasn't the fastest in my grade. The fastest kid in my grade was a guy by the name of Curtis Washington. And Curtis Washington wasn't only the fastest person in his class. He wasn't only the fastest person in his grade. He was the fastest person in our junior high. He was the fastest person in our district. It would be like having Usain Bolt. He went to junior high somewhere. Well, Usain Bolt went to my junior high, and his name was Curtis Washington. He had an unfair advantage. He was as thin as a French fry. His muscles were strapped onto those bones with rubber bands, and he could fly like an eagle, and nobody could touch him. And so I just want you to know that I was on the mile relay in 8th grade. And, you know, the person who runs the mile relay, they often have somebody called the anchor. And if you're not certain what that means, the anchor is the last leg. And if you know anything about relays and these types of events, the fastest person on your team runs the last leg. And I just want you to know, I never got to do that. Curtis Washington was the guy that you wanted to do that. And so Curtis was always the finisher of the race. And but I do want you to know, I'm just bragging here a little bit. You know, what do you do with the second fastest guy? Your second fastest guy usually starts the race. And that was the case. And I would start the race, this mile relay. So if you don't know what that is, everybody runs 1 mile around the track. You hand it off. And as soon as you hand off, you have to make a decision. You only have 2 options. You can go onto the football field, or you can go into the stadiums. And what I like to do after I hand it off, the one thing you can't do is you can't stay on the track. There are runners coming. There are racers coming. And you got to get off the track. So I would always get off the track instead of going onto the field, which you couldn't really, you know, I was just done running, and I wasn't about to keep up with my guy and follow him all the way around. The best place to watch the next guy was to get into the stadium. So this is a little junior high. We got a little bleacher seat for the parents to watch their football, and maybe a couple of parents come to the track meet. But I would go into the bleachers and stand on the highest bleacher, and I could watch my buddies run the race. And so this is exactly what happened. And you can imagine, you know, it says, you know, sometimes in a relay race like this against other teams, we would actually be winning when I handed off the baton. And can you imagine? Just follow this. In the scripture that I read to you, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 40, it says, "No one receives the prize until we finish the race." And so I just want you to realize how stupid it would have been for me to go to the judge and say, "Hey, give me my medal, man. I want my award. Give it to me now." He's not going to give me no medals. They don't give out medals in the middle of the race. He says, "Listen, after the race is over, that's when you get the medals." And so I would go into the stadium, into the bleachers, and the next guy would hand off the baton, and he would join me in the stadium. And the next guy would hand off the baton, and he would join me at the top of the bleachers. And then we together would watch Curtis Washington. You want Curtis Washington on your team in 8th grade. I'm telling you the truth. This can only happen. I watched it happen. On this particular day, when Curtis Washington got the baton, he was 50 steps behind. 50 steps behind the leader. There isn't anybody in pro sports can make up 50 steps, not at that level, not at that league, it's just never going to happen. But junior high, 8th grade, it can happen. And Curtis Washington was looking at making up 50 paces, and we knew something about Curtis. The louder you yelled and the more you yelled, the faster he'd run. And I watched Curtis Washington that day make up 50 steps in a quarter mile and won that race. And we were all in the stadium, and we were shouting and screaming, "Come on, Curtis, kick it in!" And he didn't let us down that day. He kicked it in across the finish line. And, you know, coach is standing there 25 yards in front of it saying, "Come on, Curtis, kick it in, you can do it." And, you know, I just want to suggest to you in the Hebrews chapter 11 that there is now, according to the scriptures, Hebrews 12:1, it says, "Since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, if you will, allow yourself to imagine with me that all of these people, the Hall of Faith, they're in the stadium right now. And they're screaming out to us. They're yelling at the top of their lungs, 'Kick it in.'" Can you imagine Moses right now? He's up there and says, "Come on, Leatherwood. Finish the race. I want my prize." These guys have been waiting years and years and years. They all say, "I want prize." Nobody gets a prize until this generation runs across the finish line. I don't know what they call us. There's the Xers, the Yers. I call us Generation Ace. You know, all I know is this, is that I don't want to hand off the baton. Matter of fact, I just want to suggest to you that we are Generation Ace. I think we're the generation that is going to see the return of Christ. I'd even suggest to you that it's just 1 second till midnight, and that we are right here. We are the generation. Christ is coming back in our lifetime. I don't know whether you feel that way or not. I feel that way. I'm not here to convince you to feel that way. But if you do feel that way, I want to encourage you to kick it in. Now's the time to kick it in. If you're thinking to yourself, man, it sure seems like Christ has got to be coming back soon, I think Leatherwood's right. We're at the finish line. What do we do? What do we do? How do we finish strong? I want to ask that question again. I want you to think about it, and then I'm going to give you just 3 or 4 ideas real quick. But ponder it yourself. How do we finish strong? What's it mean, not in athletic terms, what's it mean to take a life and finish strong? Well, I want to give you 2 thoughts. First of all, is that we need to be exactly about the work that we're doing right here at ICM. Since we know that the finish line is when all nations are reached, according to Jesus Christ, this gospel shall be a witness to all nations, then the end will come. Hey, man, we're about the Father's business. Congratulations. Amen to every one of us. Thank you for being aboard this team. It is great to have you as part of the ICM team. It's great to be a part of the ICM team. Janice, thanks for leading this team. What a joy. I can feel good about waking up TGIM every week. Thank God it's Monday. Man, we get to run towards the finish line because we know that we're involved with the cause of reaching all nations. But let me turn it on you this way. How do we finish strong? I got this wonderful, I want to turn the question on its head and say, how did Jesus finish strong? A little bit different question, but I think it reveals a lot. How did Jesus finish strong? If you just think about the last 24 hours of Christ, he'll give you a little idea of how we can also finish strong, other than making disciples of all nations, which is there. But the last 24 hours of his life, here's my thought about him. He made an intimate investment in others. He made an intimate investment in his 12, the Last Supper. What did he do? He said, I'm not doing this alone. He said, man, I'm pressing in, and I'm pressing in with my disciples. I want my gang here with me. And I just want to suggest to you, one way to finish strong is to press in for intimate investment of the disciples that you are around and that you're with and that you're making. Also notice that he, in the last 24 hours, he pressed into his Father. He pressed into intimate investment with God. He poured his guts out in prayer. He pursued the Lord like he'd never pursued him before. It says that he dropped sweats of blood. I mean, he pressed into the Father. That's always a good idea for us. You know, out of the pressing into the Father, you know, there was a battle of the wills going on there. And whenever you press into the Father, you will discover a battle of wills. It'll be your will and his will. But he did something, and he's a model for us. Even here at the end of the finish line, we need to yield. Not my will, but thy will be done. So as you press in, just realize he's going to ask you to lay down your life. And we need to just be willing to say yes, which takes me to the next one, and then there's one more. The next thing that he did was that he suffered faithfully. I don't know whether you're a pre-tribber or a mid-tribber or a post-tribber, or whether you think you get any tribulation in your life, or whether you just think that you're going to have to go through the birth pangs of this world coming to the end. Any way you look at it, we need to make a choice to suffer well. And that's similar to being an athlete. You know, when the coach says sprint across the finish line, sometimes I've run across the finish line with a cramp in my leg, cramps in my side. It doesn't matter. I always still can hear coach's head. I sprint across every finish line of every race I've done in the last 17 years, which takes me to the very last one, which is, you know, Jesus Christ, he not only suffered faithfully, but even on the cross, he had time. He made time for one more lost dude. Unbelievable. Even in death, he dies with excellence. Even to the last, I mean, he's there at the, you talk about the finish line, the guy is on the cross, the moments are counting. And he says, listen, you know, this guy says, I believe it's today you're going to be with me in paradise. Why was that? It's because the whole time that he'd been on the cross, he maintained perfect composure of suffering faithfully. That guy came to the conclusion, says, this guy's not like us. This guy is not like us. And Jesus made time for one last soul. And so that's it, folks. Thank you for allowing me to share the devotions with you this morning. I know I went a little long, but we are the generation that's going to carry this across real quick. Press into the Father to finish well. Press into your group of disciples and finish well. Decide to yield your will to finish well. Decide to suffer faithfully. And realize that until we give up our last breath, make room to serve and make one more disciple. Love you guys. Thank you. Glad to be a part of Generation ACE.